So Whitney, now you get paid for what you do, which is great. We all like getting paid for what we do. Was that Andy Warhol quote? You should at least get paid as much as possible for things you do. I don't think I got it quite correct. But I also know your work and the work of our guest here. And there's something beyond like getting paid that you need to do the kind of work that you two do, or to do it to the degree that you do. And I wonder if like maybe you're just very professional and you're like, nope, just for the check. That's what I do it for. But but I wonder, like, what do you think that I'm going to call it like craving is that causes you to like, for example, be stressed out about where you show up on the video that we're recording here. Like there's something that pushes you like just beyond Johnny or Jane paycheck. What you're doing.
I mean, an appreciation for excellence or no, I want to put that closer into OCD levels when you're talking about like, I want to be on the right side so the logo doesn't intersect with your head. But in terms of why do we go above and beyond? I'd say there's two big reasons. One is curiosity. And that's like, I just am dying to know the next thing. I learn one thing and that introduces me to 5 things I don't know yet. And I just really want to know them. So curiosity. And then why else? I lost my second reason. I'm a little nervous. I don't know why.
Well, maybe, next time there's a long car ride somewhere, you can ponder your drives.
Kind of, is it a chicken or the egg thing? Like in terms of getting paid well for what you do you get paid well because you're curious and always kind of pushing the line? Or are you curious and always kind of pushing the line because you're getting paid well and you don't want that to go away?
Yeah.
That's a question for you, Coté. Why do you go above and beyond?
Yeah. I'm like you. I don't really know. But I was re-listening to an interview with our guest. Why don't you introduce yourself, guest?
Guest, that must be me. I'm Tegan Goddard. I am the proprietor of a website called Political Wire.
And so to get to your, I wanted to bring you in because to answer Whitney's question, I was re-listening to your interview with Gruber driving over here, and both you and him brought up this idea. I feel like maybe you were this clear about it, but you both were like, I really wanted to be a columnist when I was growing up. and like, I think there's something like that, Whitney, that motivates me, that like the way I think about it is like, I like publishing and it does matter what I publish, but there's this drive of just like, I got to publish things. And I guess I used to like back in the 90s, I did have this idea that like, now I've got this communication platform and I can publish. Like I can get stuff out there. I had all the like an underground newspaper in school and things like that. But, I was thinking about this on the drive over here because obviously Tegan, you go above and beyond things. Like I remember listening to the podcast you had where you had been vacationing in Cuba, and it sounded like you spent a lot of time getting that to work. whereas I think most people would be like, I'm on vacation. And also, this is difficult. I'll just do it next week. But so that's a big layup to asking you, like, what is, maybe I'm mischaracterizing it, but what's like the craving that motivates you beyond just doing the job? I mean, you have your whole company, so you really do need a little bit of craziness to motivate you to do these things.
Oh, no, I'm certifiable. There's no doubt about it. So, I mean, for me, I have an insatiable appetite for politics. Yeah. So politics does not bore me. I can read about it all the time. I like you, Whitney, I want to find out about everything. And then the new thing. I like being first. I like finding out before everybody else. People come to my website because they can, because I typically have put something up there, because I have pushed through the telecommunications restrictions in Cuba, and I have been able to post to my website. And it's really that. I just have an insatiable appetite for politics. It's something I'm not probably the most well-rounded of people, but I know an awful lot about a few things.
When I'm fascinated by the idea, like you say, you want to be first, and that's really common in our industry too, in cloud computing, and I relate to it. But in cloud computing, it's like maybe there's not a lot of interest, or the community's smaller, and being first seems like more of a manageable thing. But when you're talking about politics and being first in politics, how do you know things before the rest of the world? What's your strategy for being first?
Well, so the strategy is defining first in what universe. So, obviously there's always going to be someone who knows before me. It's going to be the principals involved in whatever political activity has just taken place. Maybe their staffs, but how do I find out the news before everybody else? It started when I started the site literally 25 years ago, and the early days of the internet, and I created a set of mechanisms. So what I did, I had a day job back then, and I would have my IBM ThinkPad at the time. It would dial up on a modem at about 4 a.m. It would cache a bunch of web pages from newspapers. It would pull them down onto this laptop that I had that I brought on the commuter train that I rode into New York to my day job. I would pull together a daily briefing based upon what I was reading in the Des Moines Register and in the San Francisco Chronicle and the New York Times and whatever else I had done. And I put together something pretty interesting. And I did it mainly because I had once worked in politics. I had worked for a governor and I'd worked for a senator, but I was now working I was working on Wall Street. And it was a completely different area, but I really missed politics. So it was a way for me to both engage my interest in the internet, but also to keep that interest in politics going. And what I found is what we all found on the internet is that everyone who was just as crazy as me, who lived in New York but cared what the Des Moines Register was writing about, we all found a place where we could kind of share that experience, and that place became Political Wire. And so I developed a community of people which was no longer anchored by geography, which at the time almost every newspaper was still anchored by geography, and it was anchored by interest, and it was interest in politics. And so in those early days when newspapers put their product online, they really mimicked their newspaper version, and the newspaper version had a metro section, and it had an international section, and it had sports, and it had business. And that was how they put the newspapers up online. What I was doing though was politics. And at the time there were no politics sections. There were, nearly every newspaper now has a tab that says politics, but at the time there were not. And so I kind of became like the managing editor of politics for the internet, and created this site called Political Wire, which I can get into the origins of that because it's based upon a column in the Wall Street Journal back when I was in college. But I kind of became that editor of here's what you need to know in politics. And so I would do it at first going on the train where there was no connectivity, kind of like Cuba. And then as soon as I would find connectivity, I could publish the site. And then, I used a very early, one of probably the first blogging software that ever came out, something called Gray Matter, which was done by this kid named Noah Gray, who was just an extraordinary individual who created this software. And as soon as I saw what this software did, server-side software that had reverse chronological posts, I was like, boom.
You're not even saying blog. You're saying server-side software with reverse chronological posts.
Well, that's what it was, because Political Wire was a blog before there were blogs.
That's amazing. So what did it feel like then? You're super interested in politics. You're pulling in all these websites. You're putting them all together, aggregating it yourself into one post on one place. And now you found yourself something you're doing for a hobby is taking off and has a lot of interest, and now you're leading a community. Did you feel any amount of pressure to lead the community well? Or like, what about when you see discrepancies between different sources, or maybe you have some opinions starting to creep in about how, like, this says this over here, but this is biased over here. How do you manage being the leader?
So I never worry about bias because it's called Tegan Goddard's Political Wire. So
okay, beautiful.
It's my name's on it, and that's what the site is. It's my site, and so the bias is mine. And I actually don't think you can really be unbiased in the world, and that we all have our biases. And so if you come to my site, it's because I think this is important right now. That's it. Yeah. So I dispense with that one pretty quickly. And so I'm always amused by when I get emails saying I'm so biased, and I'm like, well, show me where I ever said I wasn't biased. I mean, you may not like what I do, and that's fine, but it's a big internet. Click somewhere else. And if you like what I'm doing, then thank you. But that was that. In terms of the community, though, and commenting, from the earliest of days, I had comments on my blog posts, and they quickly spun out of control, and just like almost everywhere else on the internet. But what's different today than back then was that there wasn't a good tool to use to moderate. I was one guy with a day job who was doing this as kind of a side hustle. It was, I wasn't even really thinking of it as a side hustle because I was only starting to make money on it. And so in the 2002 midterm elections, I couldn't take it anymore. I shut down comments. I just shut them down. I said, this is ridiculous. Interestingly enough, in terms of like internet lore, is if you're familiar with the political space, is that some of the commenters, they understood why I did it, but they then launched an effort to try to create a platform that it was better at handling comments. And that website became known as Daily Kos, which became a very popular political discussion forum, particularly among Democrats. But then, a few years later, as things got better, I turned comments back on, and they've been on now for 20 something years. And it's not, comments are not great, but what is great is that I learn from the community. So if I go back to your original question, Whitney, and I ask, how are you first? One way I'm first is that I have a lot of really smart, plugged in readers. And my readers, a lot of whom are journalists, a lot of whom are political operatives, they tell me. And that's how I tend to know things pretty quickly.
So Whitney, we were joking that you described being a blogger without saying blogger, based on the software that you're using.
Server-side reverse chronological order.
Which, perfect. Makes sense. And I wonder, there's a lot of people who, over the course of that 25 years, they started off as bloggers, especially in the political space, and it kind of expanded into a company with multiple people and all sorts of things like that, whether it's talking point memos or Vox or things like that. And I don't get, I think you're still a reverse chronological order server-side publisher, right? You have a podcast, but you haven't really why, I'm sure you've had opportunities, but why do you think you haven't decided to become Political Wire Incorporated with a board and all of this stuff? What's kept you independent?
Well, the main reason is that my previous job, when I was working on Wall Street, I was the chief operating officer of an investment management company. And I had a lot of people who worked for me, and I had a lot of responsibilities, and I wanted none of that. I did not want to get involved in the personnel problems that people would have and they'd bring to you and all the rest. I just wanted to focus on what I did. And it's not that I work alone, because like I said, I rely on my readers. I rely on all sorts of sources to help me do what I do. I outsource, my advertising. I have really great software developers who help, but they're not full-time employees. And it keeps it a little bit more personal when I call it Tegan Goddard's Political Wire. That's what it is. It's you come here and this is what I think is important. And this is my community that I've created. And and we talk about politics, and we learn about what just happened, and we try to make sense of it. And, if you've been paying attention to politics over the last decade or more, it's been a little crazy. So there's a lot to try to figure out.
One thing I like about your blog is that the tone of it is so relaxed. Now that I'm meeting you too, you have a very relaxed presence about you. And increasingly, all news sources, and including and maybe especially political news sources, are becoming more frantic and sensationalized and screamy. And yours feels just kind of like factual and stating it and trusting the audience a little bit to put stuff together, as opposed to having to cram the final word down your throat. And so I guess, do you think as journalism in general has become more sensational, do you think you've become a little more sensational at least, or have you always kept this like nice tone? How intentional is it?
It's extremely intentional, and it's actually extremely flattering that you noticed it. Because I don't try to hit people over the head. I make the assumption that if you're reading my site, that you're a smart individual. First of all, my site's all text, right? Uh-huh. So if you're coming to read a site of all text, that says something about you right now. It means you didn't click over because of some image, some crazy headline or something like that. You're here to find out the facts. You're here to find out about what has happened in politics. The way I like to look at it is you come to Political Wire to find out, and most people who read the site refresh, keep it open in a tab in their web browser and refresh multiple times during the day. And so it's just a thing that's open, and you come, and every time you refresh, here's what's happening right now. And the way that, so if you have the assumption that your readers are smart and that you don't need to lead them through, and even some of the newer readers, the people who may not know as much about politics, they can pick it up pretty quickly. They can pick up the thread of these stories in terms of what's happening. So I don't need to get into this long, drawn out, I don't have to put 600 words up when all it needs is 2 sentences, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that, when I talk about bias, there is, editorial judgment is kind of everything, and when I really am surprised that someone hasn't come along over the course of 25 years and done what I do better, because on one level, it seems extremely simple what I do. Mm-hmm. And, and I built a decent audience, and, it's a good business and all that. But I think one of the things that I underestimate about myself is that because I don't tire of politics, and I'm always there, that my judgment is pretty good about what's important. And I think people, they like that. They appreciate that. And, and so I'm the one who goes crazy, and people who have, broader lives than I do and who take vacations and things like that, they know that at any time they can come back to the site, find out what's going on about politics.
So you mentioned where you got your dislike of running a large organization, investment banking. and I was thinking through other writers who come from a financial background, right? I mean, there's of course like Matt Levine, who writes a great column. There's VCs who come around, like you can tell they like writing, but they're kind of like swimming in numbers. And then there's someone like way out there like Nassim Taleb, right, who like also likes writing and is from the financial world. And I wonder, is there, if you go from like the financial world to writing, like, is there something that like happens to you in the financial world that makes you kind of weird? Or did you leave the financial world because you're kind of weird? Like that you like the writing? Like, does it change your mind when it comes to writing and publishing things, or does it have no effect at all?
No, I don't think it had much of an effect. I mean, I have been interested in politics since I was 10 years old. I was sitting, and it was the 1976 presidential election. Jimmy Carter was the dark horse candidate, and on election night, he's running against the incumbent president, Gerald Ford, and I am sitting in my parents' den with the TV on, and my father and I have legal pads. He was a lawyer, and we are tracking the electoral vote on these legal pads. And I just thought, it opened my eyes, and I never stopped loving politics from that moment. I mean, it was just amazing to me how we elected a president. And then over the years, I would meet various politicians, and I've always had a very idealistic view of politics, so that you could win power to achieve great good. And
you still have it now?
Believe it or not, I still do.
Wow.
I'm an eternal optimist. So, and maybe that's why I don't get tired of it, because I can see it. Politics is messy. Politics is ugly, but, gaining power in order to use it in a useful way is, I think, a worthwhile goal. So.
Absolutely. So here's my question. If some people are relying on you for their news, they have their browser open, they're looking for the latest thing. What happens in your world, right? If something big happens politically, do you have an alarm that goes off? What if some major world thing is happening right now while we record this podcast? Will you be like, oh, I gotta go. My readers are depending on me. What happens?
Okay, so it's a fantastic question. So the wonderful thing is that normally doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So you don't have to get too stressed out about it. That's something actually I did learn working, for an investment firm, is that you realize that actually market meltdowns only rarely happen. And so you don't, when something happens, you had to be there and be ready. But for the most part, every day is kind of boring. And I can't say politics is boring. Politics actually hasn't been boring really in 10 years. Yeah. And there's always something. I mean, it may be depressing, but there's all sorts of things going on all the time. But, if something really big were to happen right now, I would probably ask each of you to give me a minute and a half to take care of it and to focus it. But I get all sorts of alerts. And so I get traditional alerts, that you might get from, the major newspapers, and those are fine. Some of them actually are terrible. They don't come in very timely, but I know the more timely ones. But then I have this back end that I created over the course of years, where I have all of these feeds, and it's kind of influenced with, in later years, I pulled in kind of signals from social media. So if people who I respect start to share things on social media, things all of a sudden get pushed up to the top. And, when they pass certain parameters, they get pushed to me directly. You should probably take a look at this. And so unfortunately for my family, I'm always kind of plugged in, but I think they're used to me by now. But it's not, I'm not, but the thing is, my Apple Watch is one of the greatest things that I've ever had, because I can be at dinner and I can still feel like I'm plugged in without taking out my phone. But of course, if I'm out with people who don't really know me and I look at my watch, I always run the risk of acting like I'm bored and looking at what time it is. So anyway, most of my friends.
Your watch is sort of like the what do you call it? The comfort dog that people have. Like you'd be a little freaked out if you didn't have your friend around to make sure things
exactly
are soothing.
So when it would get bad, I would put various focus modes on to shelter out stuff. But I do have like an Uber focus mode that lets the important stuff in. So if my watch buzzes, then I know I need to pay attention.
I'm curious to hear more about your alerting backend, if you will, because working in tech, I try to follow what's going on with AI, and they've fallen into this terrible habit, the kids of AI, where they just publish things every now and then on Twitter, which I don't really read that much. So I miss all this stuff. And it used to be like I could subscribe to RSS feeds and I was done. But now, like, I have to go look at all these places, and it sounds like, I'm envious. It sounds like you figured out how to not have to go look at all of the places. And so like, what is this machine that you've built? Like, how does it work? And did you build it? Like,
yeah, I built
what's
it.
Up with it? I want to hear more about it.
So I built it. So in the early days of the internet, I became a kind of a fan of Dave Weiner, who was the
Sure.
inventor of RSS, and Aaron Schwartz, who worked on RSS as well. And these were just guys who were doing this. I guess Dave had a company, but I would email them and I would ask questions, about what they were doing. And I realized that this was a very powerful technology. And so I was using RSS at the very beginning. It's different now because not all sites have a good RSS feed. So sometimes you need to have, build them yourself and scrape. But what I use is based on RSS, but then it also has signals from Twitter or, X or whatever you call it. I'm trying to take some of those signals now from Blue Sky as well. In order to if there are links that are being shared, to boost them so that I know about them. But it allows me in relatively short order to get to my computer and to say, okay, I've been away for 90 minutes. Here's what happened. Sometimes nothing happens. Other times there's 5 really interesting stories. Sometimes 2 of those you want to post now, and maybe others you post a little bit later. But then there's the occasional big story. I think the biggest advantage that I always had was so many media companies, and goes back to your question about why didn't I want to have a bigger media company here. So many media companies, what they do. So this is actually an example. As I was driving home from skiing, I believe from Vermont, and I live in New York, and I was driving, and I had stopped at a rest area, and Senator Evan Bayh from Indiana announced he was not going to run for re-election. I instantly wanted a story. I wanted to link to a story on my site so that my readers could know, because this is a potential presidential candidate. He's not running for re-election. What do you think about all this? And I couldn't find a story, except in the source was a interview he gave to the Indianapolis Star. And I said, oh, well, that's better than anything. So I literally had one sentence. Senator Evan Bayh tells the Indianapolis Star that he's resigning. That's it. One sentence. But I gave my readers everything they needed to know in one sentence and one link. By the time I got home, the New York Times still didn't have the story. The Washington Post had the story, but it had only been up for about 45 minutes at that time. What they were doing was they were assigning reporters to read the interview that Evan Bayh gave and then to write their story. And my view is like, what a waste of time that is. It's just a waste of resources. You're writing a story based on an interview that's literally a click away. And by the way, none of the major publications linked to the original interview. And Evan Bayh had not spoken to anyone else. And I realized at that time, I said, that's perfection. To be able to show my readers the news in a very short way, and then to give them all the information they need about it. And I just think that's kind of what I try to do on Political Lawyer.
Yeah, and there's not even, I can't even imagine if New York Times was doing that, how they would even make a one sentence piece of content, that isn't just a social post. But one thing I'm curious about what you do, like politics it ebbs and it flows. Like sometimes there's a lot of big stuff happening. Sometimes it's slow. Does your content ebb and flow accordingly, or do you kind of inflate stuff that's small during slow times and then have to curate stuff that's big during busy times?
That's a fantastic question. It's actually something I try not to do. This is where the number one thing that actually helped me do that is that, so I have the business model is I have a free site, which is monetized by advertising. And I have subscriptions, a membership, which all the ads go away and that's the site. What I try to do is I try to write only for my members, because if I start writing for the free site, then I'm influenced by advertising. And and what that sometimes requires is that I just feed the content beast, and I just have more and have more and have more. But I'm not doing it for my readers. I'm doing it for my advertisers.
Yeah.
And that's not good. And so the beautiful thing about the subscription business, so everyone who's listening, support, the sites that have subscriptions, because it really is the most honest business model out there. It's just me and my readers who pay for what I create. That's it. And I just keep doing that. And so if I were to start inflating, things that are kind of meaningless just because it's a slow time, I'm not doing anybody well. In fact, I got in this
losing
big
trust. Yeah.
Yeah, I got in this big debate. I was on this panel with a bunch of television news producers, including the executive producer of one of the top morning shows in America. And I said we were talking about cable news. I said the problem with cable news is that you have 24 hours of news to fill, and that you just fill it.
Yes.
I said what I would much rather have is I would much rather turn the news on at 8:00 and to have someone say, "There's really only two things that happen that are worthy of your attention. Why don't you turn this off and watch a movie?"
Here's one sentence linked to the article.
Yeah, but that's what I'd rather have. I don't want to waste people's time.
Yeah,
I want to tell them what's important. And so I do get readers who on the weekends, just because weekends tend to be slower, they're wondering why I don't post as much. And well, I don't post as much because less is happening.
Because I respect your time, reader.
Right. I mean, I just think that I'm just doing it for readers, but it took that business model. It's driven by the business model. When someone's paying me just to make their life easier and tell them what happened, it's so direct. And it's like, that's what I prefer. I don't want to be led down various paths because monetization is forcing me down that path. That's just a bad situation. That's what CNN is right now. CNN, nothing happens, yet they have some dumb video, a 90-second clip, and they play it all night long, because it's, and that's it. And they, they do everything to get you to not turn off the channel. Anyway, I don't want people coming to Political Wire if nothing's happened. Go enjoy your life, do something else. But when something's happening, this is the place you should come to find out about it.
So as you just demonstrated, you put a lot of thought into the relationship with the readers, right? Which you have to do, as you're saying. When you have a one to many subscription business, so to speak, like you're the one person going to many, and like I wonder, like over the time where you've charged for it, have there been times where all of a sudden you have all this churn and you have to go and figure out why people are leaving? Like, because that's another thing that I think is interesting about a business like yours is you are both the publisher and the writer, right? The one who like cares about the business a great deal and the one producing the content, which traditionally are separated. So I don't know. I'm curious when those two things conflict with each other or cause friction. And it seems like if all of a sudden you had some churn happening, that would be an issue.
Yeah, fortunately, the business is solid enough that I don't really have to worry too much about it. And I do get churn. I'll get angry readers who are like, they can't stand that I linked to this or that I said this, and they'll cancel their subscription. And I'm like, okay, fine. I mean, I'll miss you, but there's always 3 more behind you ready to come in, and that's fine. If this triggers you in some way and you don't like what I just said, okay. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm not going to argue with you. But, so an example of this was in early 2024, I was starting to be very concerned about Joe Biden's ability to be president, and he's running for re-election, and he was not, in many cases, I'm not. You didn't know. The question. There was questions. How fit is he? And he was just running, and yet we're going to elect him to 4 years. And so there was a period of about 2 months before the June debate with Donald Trump, where he then showed himself to not be fit in that debate. And then a period of time after that, because then there was all of the residual reporting around that. And I had some readers who were very angry with me that they're like, you're killing the Democrats, you're killing Joe Biden, you're going to hurt Joe Biden's chances and all the rest. And my view is like, look, I'm just telling you what I think is important right now.
Yeah.
And I would remind them that, there was a poll the previous summer in August of 2023, which said 80% of Americans thought Joe Biden was too old to run for president again. So 80%. And I would just ask my readers, what else is there in politics in which 80% of people agree on anything? Like, there's nothing. So whether Joe Biden was fit or not, I'm not a doctor and I don't hang out with him every day. I can't tell you. But I can tell you this: if the perception is that 80% of American voters don't think he's fit, he's never going to overcome that. Right? Like, that's impossible to overcome. And the only way to overcome it is to have an early debate in June of 2024 with Donald Trump, and he blew it. And so at that point, you're never overcoming it. And so, but I had readers who were very angry with that. And so, yeah, they would cancel their subscriptions and all the rest. But I'll say this, my subscription base is higher today than it was then. And I think at the end of the day, people realize that I'm not creating some safe space for you. I'm trying to tell you what's happening in politics. And, sometimes they don't like it. Sometimes I don't like it. It is what it is. It just, politics is ugly, and sometimes it gets really ugly, and people are very passionate, which is awesome. But, I'm just trying to tell you what's happened. I don't make the news. I just report it.
So you're telling me lots of stories about people kind of being upset. Do you have any stories about your readers being really happy, or like an uplifting story about a particular reader making a difference in someone's existence?
Well, speaking more broadly than an individual one, one of the funniest things that ever happened is I really thought after all these years that I should redesign Political Wire, and I had all these ideas for what I wanted to do, and so I put out a poll, and I had my readers fill out the poll, and I would tell you, I think it was 90% of the readers said, "Oh no, don't do anything." keep it just like that. This is what we like. And it was extremely reassuring to me to know that the readers cared that much about it, in the way. So if you go back to the business models, because at the end of the day, if you don't have a good business model for journalism and for informing people, then you're just going to be led down all these paths. It's terrible. One of the things that I always try to do is I try to be part of people's lives. And so that means that every day, Political Wire might be the first place they go. They might go there when they have their lunch break. They might go there before they go to bed at night just to see what happened. On Friday mornings, a podcast for our subscribers drops every Friday morning without fail. That's what you get. And you become part of their lives. And the goal really is to, if you can become part of somebody's life and always be front of mind, that's kind of the holy grail in media. And if all of a sudden you were to go away, people would miss it. Well, that's a pretty good business, right? Yeah. And I'm not trying to overwhelm people with things they don't need. I'm just trying to provide a service that they find useful. And I think I think that a lot of media companies, they when you talk about media struggling financially, I think they just lose that basic thing, to have that connection with their audience. There are very few. I will say this: there are very few newspapers or news sources that if they were to go away, it would change my entire world.
That's actually something I'm kind of curious about. Like, I like your approach a lot, and talking you through it with you, I see how deliberate it is, and I think that's wonderful. Are there other news sources that have an approach that you respect? Like, what news sources are you excited to consume?
Well, so I mean, it's the one that Coté is talking about, that he heard an interview with John Gruber. So outside of the political space, I instantly became a fan of John Gruber at Daring Fireball because of his site. I mean, I thought that what he did was extremely elegant. And again, John doesn't waste people's time. He provides sometimes no more than a sentence, but he always provides a link. And to me, it's one of, if you're trying to keep up on the Apple universe, it's one of the great places to go. And he will also, he will go 2-3 days sometimes without posting anything. And then he'll have a series of things, and you can tell he's just been thinking about some nuanced thing that Apple is doing, maybe with the pricing on their iPhones. And then he lets you know, and you just feel this great, that's so great that somebody's been thinking about this for me and letting me know. The other one in the tech area that I have just truly become, is that holy grail of media where it's top of mind is Ben Thompson at Stratechery. And he writes all about business strategy, but the insights that he has into our world, it makes you realize that everything in our world is being undermined, changed, modified by technology. And, the story might be about OpenAI and ChatGPT, but the takeaways really are going to impact your next 10 years. And so I thoroughly love what he does as well. That's kind of in the tech area. So those are sites that, and interestingly enough, I don't actually pay, because all day long I focus on politics. There are political sites that I like. There are political newsletters I like. My co-author on our podcast Trial Balloon, which drops on Friday mornings, his name's Chris Reback, and he has a daily newsletter which summarizes all the non-political news. And there's some politics thrown in there as well, but tech, business, world events, that's the place where you want to go to see what else is happening in the world. And it's part of my media diet. So
this is a great way to start a question like this, but I haven't finished reading your book yet, but I'm enjoying the 2/3 I've read so far. I found it on archive.org so I could read it on my screen instead of having to wait to order it, which is sometimes hard to get in the Netherlands. English books over there, but sure. Reading through it, like the first I don't know, half or third, y'all spend a lot of time talking about, I'm going to be very broad strokes here, fixing government, right? Like kind of streamlining it, if you will. And there's a lot of anecdotes in there. And, one of the things that comes up a lot is just like, I do a lot of like what they used to call digital transformation, how you change the way large companies do software. And it's incredibly similar because oftentimes it's just like people didn't want to change. End of story. And I wonder, like, there's a lot of recommendations that y'all make and come against. And I wonder I forget when it was published, but I guess in the 90s, because Clinton's kind of where it stops, if I remember. Do you think you would write the same things now, or have things changed? Like, what's the advice that you would give nowadays as far as like, what are the tactics to change these big organizations?
And before you answer that, will you describe your book and what it's about?
Of course.
Whitney's always good at this.
So the book, I don't know if you recall, there was a movie in 1972 called The Candidate, starring Robert Redford. And Robert Redford ran for U.S. Senate as this very idealistic candidate. And at the end of the movie, I think it might be the exact last line of the movie, he says something along the lines of, he wins the election, and he says something along the lines of, okay, now what? And so the title of our book is called You Won, Now What? And it's all about these politicians who come from all walks of lives, who run for office, and then are put in charge of governments at the local, state, federal level. Sometimes they're appointees, they're working for the politicians, and they're in charge of agencies. In any event, they all of a sudden find themselves in government, which is a world unlike any they've ever been in before, and they get lost. And they immediately, we could talk about Donald Trump's first term, right? He gets in there, there's no idea what he's doing, and in his terminology, it was the deep state that overran him and caused him great harm. But the same thing happened to Bill Clinton in 1992. He gets elected, comes in January of 1993, and it was a chaotic mess because all these people came from all walks of life. They filled, his chief of staff had been a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but had never worked in government before. None of them knew how different government was. And so our book tries to give you a handle on that it's one of the great things about our government in the fact that we pull people in from all walks of life, because it gives you a much better sense of what issues are important and what you should focus on, I think. But at the same time, government's a huge organization. I mean, the federal government is just massive. And the idea that you could bring someone in who doesn't know how things work in the public sector, there's a chapter that we have called "It's Not a Government, It's Not a Business," which is entirely attempted to debunk the idea that you can run government like a business, because you can't. And it's just set up differently for good reasons. But that's what we attempted to do. Now, would we do it differently? I would do it differently, because this actually ties in a little bit to our discussion earlier about Joe Biden and whether Joe Biden stayed past his expiration date, so to speak, whether he stayed in too long. And one of the big changes that has happened over this period of time, at least on the Democratic side, has been that the people, used to, in 1992, I was working in the U.S. Senate, and I was actually working on some of the confirmations of these new officials who would come in to the Clinton administration. And we would work on these confirmations at the confirmation hearings. And these were people coming from every walk of life all over the country. Something changed over the course of the last 25 years. And what has changed is, on the Democratic side, is that once you worked in the 8 years of the Clinton term, then you worked in the Obama administration, then you worked in the Biden administration. Now the political appointees, 90% of them seem to all be from Washington. And they're from Washington, and then when their party is out of power, they go work at a think tank, work at a law firm, do something different, but then they come right back in. And I think a lot of the problems that Biden had was that the people advising him wanted power. They wanted to be in power. And so that they realized their power is tied to him. And if he were to leave, they wouldn't have power either. And I think that that's one of the things that's changed a lot. On the Democratic side, that changed significantly. We have a different problem on the Trump side. When Trump came in, because he feared the deep state, he brought all sorts of people who have no idea how government works, and they're banging around and doing all sorts of damage, which at some point they'll regret a lot of it. But they kind of have the opposite problem. So there's got to be some balance. But we have this system where you can literally come in and be Secretary of Transportation, and what are your credentials? I mean, look at Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary. He was a Fox News host. How do you go from Fox News host to have 3 million people work for you?
So is your book literally read by people who are in office, or do you think it has a more general appeal, or is it still a relevant book? You said it was written in 98.
It was published in 98, but so interestingly enough, it's still being published. So you still can get it. And it's kind of amazing and kind of rare to have a book that is still available. Now, I'm not going to say it's a bestseller, but the fact that you can still get it is kind of amazing. The publisher, which is Simon & Schuster, has made it available all these years later because people are still buying it. And, so it's gratifying that way. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not really the same person who reads Political Wire. They might be interested in it because they want to know more about what my thoughts are, more broadly about government. But it's not a political junkie isn't necessarily going to read the book. It's more of like a management book for the person who comes in as the chief of staff to the transportation secretary.
Oh, wow.
And, something like that.
Have
Yeah,
you ever?
it's what happens after all the confetti's been swept up, right?
When the champagne hangover's done. Yeah. Have you ever run for an elected position?
I have not. So it was always part of the plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was always part. So my plan when I was 22 years old, I wanted to work in politics for a decade, and the reason for that was that you could get a lot of experience really young, doing some very exciting things. So I worked for a U.S. senator and for a governor, and then I was going to spend the next decade working in the private sector, earning money so that I could support a political career in the future potentially. But then, and so I did. I actually went to go work on Wall Street, and then I was conflicted though at that point. What I wanted to do next. I know you can't always just run for office if you want to. Sometimes you have to wait your turn, or figure out when the best opening is. And so my alternative plan was that I wanted to own the New Republic, which was a thought magazine back in the 1990s. It still exists, but it's a very different publication. But it was this magazine that would come weekly that I would devour, and I wanted to own it. And ironically, years later, I did have lunch with the owner, one of the new owners, and he did offer to sell part of it to me because it was losing a lot of money. and I chose to not do that. So I have the next best thing. I have a political website that has a far bigger readership than the New Republic ever did. So,
you said it's always part of the plan in kind of an open-ended way, though. Does that mean it's in your future?
It's not in my future. No. Interestingly, that was when I met my wife. When we both got out of college, she had no interest in politics, and she's become the politician. So she actually ran for office. So
nice.
Yeah.
Did she read your book? Did she win and read your book?
She would say that she did. I don't know if she did or not. She kind of feels like she gets enough from me already. So.
Yeah, and I guess it's dangerous territory to secretly quiz your wife about have you read my stuff? Come up with little questions here and there. Well, there's every now and then we have a final question we like to ask, or I don't know, I like to ask, and it's a little personal. But if I were to go into your kitchen, totally invited, of course, not being creepy, and I were to look at the cabinet or open the drawer that you keep all your, whether it's name branded, your Tupperware in, what would I see? How do you have it arranged? What do you have in there? Like what's going on in there?
Okay, well, I could take zero credit for any of this because I'm actually kind of a slob. The only thing that I have control over is this office of mine. And my wife is the complete opposite of me. And so the Tupperware is completely sorted by size, and the lids are all put away nicely. And if anything, every time I go in there, I mess it all up. So it sounds like left to your own devices, it would just be chaos. Does that feel right? I would just kind of throw everything in there, and I'd find it when I need it. But yeah, I'm not the most organized of people that way. So.
And okay, so just let's imagine a little bit. Let's say you became, the minister of the leftover food containers, right? And of course you want to base it on like good best practices that have come before you. But like what's in your 2-page memo about how we're going to go forward with the container thing? Like we're expecting some changes that are going to make things better. We want to put remove the flaws that we had. Like, what are you going to do in this new office of managing the Tupperware?
I don't think I would ever just see, it's one of those things where I think I just have zero interest. The only thing I am interested in the kitchen is I actually believe that this is a key to success on the internet, is that I am a massive fan of good coffee. And so the section of the kitchen where I make coffee every morning, and I have this very elaborate process that I do, and I have the best equipment and the best everything, and I care about it, and my wife benefits from this every single morning, that's the only part of the kitchen I care about, is how to make coffee. So
what kind of machine do you have for that? Or maybe you don't have a machine, analog?
Yeah, it's not even a machine. It's actually called the Southern Soft Press, which is a ceramic container with a stainless steel filter that goes into it. And it's most similar to a French press without the press. So you don't press it because when you press it, you release the oils of the coffee beans into your coffee, which makes it bitter. So instead, the coffee, which has to be ground in a burr grinder, and just so, and it steeps like tea for about 5 minutes, and it creates the best coffee that you've ever had. So if you're ever in the area, come by. I'll make you a cup.
Yeah, I used to have the is it a Bodim? There's that glass container with the wooden thing around it. I used that for several years, and it's like so pleasurable to like make good coffee. Drinking it's nice too, but I don't know how I fell out of doing
that's a good backup method. I found this thing. You can only get it in London, and so the last time I had one break, I actually ordered several, and it cost me a fortune to have them shipped over, but it's so worth it. So they're outstanding.
Have like impeccable coffee taste buds where you could like be served a cup of coffee and be like, oh, somebody pressed this. I can taste the slight bitterness from the pressing.
I am a coffee snob to the big. Yeah, I'm very annoying that way. So I would go on vacation and I'd rather not have coffee than have bad coffee. Whereas I think most people who drink coffee, they want coffee. And,
yeah, I'm definitely one of those. I'm in Europe, just give me the instant stuff. It's cool. I got it.
Exactly. So that is where I'm different. But
well, great. I really appreciate you being on this the episode. It's fun talking with you. And as mentioned several times, I mean, I subscribe to Political Wire. I look forward to the podcast. Friday's always a big day, podcast wise. I get the dithering, and I get your podcast, a few others. It's nice to listen to. But yeah, I mean, I recommend subscribing to it. It's
thank you so much.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being on.
Thanks for having me. That was a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, as always, you've successfully listened to another episode of Software Defined Interviews. If you want to get the show notes for this, which I probably already mentioned what I'll point to, probably the book and the website, but you can go to softwaredefinedinterview.com / whatever the episode number is. 101. 101. Oh, there you go. Just like a highway I'm going to drive on in a little bit. And check it out. There's a Slack channel you can join, things like that. But thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.